Recording. Okay. Make you front center. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. The conclusion of this week's Parsha deals with Amalek. It's a very well-known Parsha because we read it again for Shabbat Zachor. And it's one of the Sheish Zechirot, one of the 6 things that Jews are bidden to remember every day of their lives. So Amalek is remembered as the first and greatest enemy of the Jewish people, who attacked us when we left Egypt for no apparent cause or reason. And the Torah says, Asher korcha baderech, on the road he ambushed you. And when you were vulnerable, tired, worn out, below Yirei Elohim, and without fear of God. So there's a difference in the Meforshim. Without a fear of God, does that refer to the Jewish people? And that is what made us so vulnerable? Or whether that refers to Amalek? Amalek doesn't care. He has no fear of God. So the Torah says, Timche Zecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim. We shall destroy erase the memory of Amalek from this earth. And that's a constant goal of the Jewish people. In practical terms, the Rambam already asserts that we cannot identify Amalek in this world anymore. And generally speaking, we think of Amalek as anybody that oppresses us, opposes us, vilifies us. They fit the definition of Amalek, even though genetically they may not be Amalek. And therefore, there is no question today of destroying anyone physically, because we cannot identify Amalek. But you will notice that the Torah said, Timche as Zecher Amalek. Zecher Amalek is not the physical Amalek. It's the power of Amalek to influence the world. It's the echo of Amalek in the world. And that we are still bidden to war against and to attempt to eliminate. So here we have a basic issue in Jewish life that has occurred over and over again during all the generations of the Jewish people, for which we have really no clear solution, no policy of unanimity regarding how we should deal with it. And the issue, bluntly put, is how shall we deal with Amalek? Should we try and reconcile Amalek? Try and soften him? Trying to come to terms with him? Or should we give up on the matter and just destroy him to the best of our ability and not, so to speak, waste our time in efforts that will turn out to be fruitless? And that's a bitter issue. Now, we see in Tanakh that at the time of Shmuel Hanovi, which is the famous Haftorah of Parsha Zohar, there was an attempt to physically eradicate Amalek. And it failed for whatever reasons. And Amalek continued. And in every generation, Shebachol dor v'dor umdim aleinu l'chaloseinu. In every generation, Amalek has a rebirth. He's here again. So how are we to deal with it? We'll discuss in a minute how that affects current events here in the Jewish law. So there's a famous Gemara. At the time of the rise of Christianity, there were many Jews who were Christians, and they infiltrated the Jewish community. And they infiltrated the synagogues and the yeshivot. And they claimed that they were the real Jews. And they were observant. But they were really members of a different faith completely. So the rabbis created an extra bracha in the Amidah, in the Shmoneh Esrei. We, in the Ashkenazic world, we call it La Malshinim. In the Gemara, it's called Birchas Haminim. Min was the appellation that was used for early Christians. And they wanted to compose a blessing that would be inserted in the Amidah. So that instead of 18 brachot, there would be 19. And anyone who refused to recite that blessing was immediately suspected of being a min and excluded from the Jewish people. The Gemara looked for someone, the Chazal looked for someone to compose that bracha. And the person to compose the bracha was Shmuel HaKatan, the minor Shmuel, the smaller Shmuel. Meaning we had Shmuel HaNavi But this is a later Shmuel HaKatan. But he was the great man of the generation. He was above suspicion. And they knew that he would not insert his own personal animus into the bracha, but that he would deal with the bracha in terms of its practicality and eternity. And he composed the bracha. Very powerful bracha. And if a person did not recite the bracha properly, was unable to recite the bracha, so then that person was suspected of being a min and was excluded. So the Gemara says a rule, we had it in the Mishnah in Ovos, Al Talmin Biatzmecha ad Yom Moscha. Don't believe in yourself. As long as you're alive, you can still, no matter how pious and great you are, you may fall off the cliff. So the Gemara brings a story about Yochanan Kohen Gadol. We don't know who that person was exactly. That he was the Kohen Gadol for decades, and he entered into the Holy of Holies. And at the end, he became a non-believer, became a tzdoki. Then the Gemara has a second story, remarkable story. I had a chance to discuss this morning with Dr. Yudah Eliezer, who raised this issue with me as well. The Gemara says a story about Shmuel HaKatan himself. So Shmuel HaKatan was the Shliach Tzibur. He was the Chazan. He was reciting the Shmoneh Esrei. And he came to the bracha of La Malshinim. The Gemara says he stuttered. He was unable to finish the bracha. He didn't say it completely. So there were two opinions. One opinion was that let him, he's Shmuel HaKatan. We don't suspect him of being a min. He's the one that composed the bracha against the minim. So therefore, we don't know what happened here, but let him continue. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no. If he couldn't finish the bracha, if he couldn't say it, then we do suspect him. So, al tamin bi'atzmecha, you don't believe it, you can't trust anybody. So the Gemara there says, well, maybe Shmuel HaKatan is different, he's a tzaddik gomer. Well, so Rashi says a tzaddik gomer means that he never sinned before. There are people that are tzaddikim, but that they are like Balei Tshuva. You know, Gemara looks for ways out. So what happened here? So this raises this basic issue. How do we deal with our enemies? One way to deal with them is to attempt to destroy them, not to give any quarter, not to decide that we're going to be nice about it. and not, so to speak, to compromise ourselves in any way. And the other way is, maybe we can reform Amalek. Maybe we can make Amalek better. Maybe we can mollify him. We can make it that it should not be so negative and hostile. And that's what we should attempt to do. And you see this over and over in Chazal. Bruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, said, Yitamu chatoyim in oretz. Chatoyim nemar, chotim lo nemar. We want sin to disappear, not sinners. So we have an outlook towards others, even if they be sinners, that's charitable. That's positive. And for instance, you see from Avraham Avinu, when he has to deal with Sdom, so it says, Anshe Sdom, roim v'achatoim la'Hashem b'mod mod. Terrible people. Avraham Avinu wants to save them. Ulai, maybe there's some good ones among them. Can't generalize like that. Maybe there's 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. So there is that stream that exists in Jewish life and in Jewish tradition, that even the worst of sinners and the greatest of enemies, somehow we should attempt to reconcile them and not destroy them. And that's really what happened to Shaul with Amalek. Why didn't he destroy them? Because he said maybe there's a benefit from them. We can have both material and social benefit from them. Let's reform them, rehabilitate them. So you have here Shmuel HaKoton, when he came to say the bracha, he was torn by the two approaches to that. On one hand, the bracha is Shaber, Smager, Sachnia, destroy them. On the other hand, maybe we can do it in a nice fashion to be able to reconcile them and not necessarily have to deal with them so harshly. And we're afraid that heaven deals with us as we deal with others. And if we are completely unforgiving, so then we're afraid that perhaps that's how it will be dealt with as well. So you have here this ambivalence. And Shmuel HaKoton represents that ambivalence. On one hand, he's the author of that bracha. He composed all of those harsh words. On the other hand, when he had to say it himself, he wasn't quite certain that that was the approach that was necessary. Now, in Jewish history, this has played itself out in how the Jewish attitude towards our enemies and persecutors should be. Take Christianity for an example. Christianity basically was the Roman Catholic Church till the time of the Reformation. And even after the Reformation, still is the largest of all Christian groups. So on one hand, it's the Inquisition, it's exile, it's pogroms, it's anti-Semitic preaching, it's hostility, it's condemning the Jewish people to being an inferior race. It's certainly the source of European anti-Semitism. On the other hand, over the last number of decades, Jews have had diplomatic relations with the Vatican. There are interfaith conferences. The State of Israel has relationships. And in our time, for instance, much of the support to the State of Israel comes not from Jews, but comes from Christians, especially in the United States. So how do we deal with that? How do we look at it? And that's not clear. And it's unique to our time because until our time, we really had no option. We had no independence of ourselves to be able to assert ourselves, so to speak, vis-a-vis the Christian world, etc. And just the current issue, Poland. So Poland is, the soil of Poland is blood soaked with Jewish blood. It's been so for centuries. Poland now has taken a very anti-Semitic stance on many issues. It officially says really terrible things about the Jews. To a certain extent, it accuses us that we created the Holocaust. And that we're only interested in money and reparations and taking back property. So what? And so they say, for instance, we don't want anymore that you should send groups to Poland to visit the camps because of the fact that those groups are being fed anti-Polish propaganda by the Jewish tour guides. And we don't want it anymore. So they're telling us, don't come. What should our response be? So a gut reaction would be, we're not coming. There's no tourism to Poland except for us. The greatest tourist attraction in Poland is Auschwitz. Nobody is standing in line to buy tickets to go to Poland except for the Jews. It's the same thing with the Ukraine, with Uman. Ukraine does not appear to be one of the top choices for tourism or vacation in the world. So the Jews, for instance, when they were expelled from Spain, did not go back to Spain for 500 years till Spain apologized, revoked the decree. The Spanish king said we were wrong. But Jews didn't go to Spain. So maybe Jews shouldn't go to Poland. Spain had as many great people as Poland had for the Jews. They had as many yeshivot, that everything. You can go to Spain. No, we're not coming. Timche Zecher Amalek, we're destroying it. We're erasing it from our memory. So we have the generations after the Holocaust, after the Shoah. Germany's Amalek. In fact, there's a Gemara that seems to indicate that. Gemara says Amalek became Germania, which is the Roman, a corruption of the Latin, which probably means Germany. Well, it certainly proved itself to be Amalek. Destroyed a third of the Jewish people. So what should our attitude towards Germany be? That's a debate that existed here in Israel, bitter debate that existed for decades. It was correct in taking reparations. And Gurion looked at it to be purely a practical matter. Israel was poor, it had no industrial infrastructure. Germany was willing to build it. Germany built the railroad system originally, the electrical grid. You want to buy submarines, you got to buy them from Germany. Menachem Begin opposed it to such an extent that he was so violent in his opposition that he was expelled for a period of time from the Knesset because of his outbursts on the matter. So they said the difference was that Begin went through the Holocaust and Ben-Gurion didn't. But it's not only that, it's the difference in the viewpoints. How to deal with it. The Gemara says there was a great apostate by the name of Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. And he was a great scholar. He was an apokeros, but he was a great scholar. And one of his disciples was the great Rabbi Meir, who's one of the Tanoim, one of the pillars of the Mishnah. Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. If you have a Mishnah without a name in it, that's Rabbi Meir's Mishnah. And Rabbi Meir continued to study with and from Elisha ben Avuya, even when Elisha ben Avuya was exposed as a Roman agent, a spy, an apostate, a negative person. And when Meir was asked, how did he do that? So he said, Tocho ochad klipo zorak. It's like you eat a fruit. You throw out the peelings or the pit, but the edible part you can eat. And this was the same Rabbi Meir whose wife, Bruria, is the one that said, Yitamu chatoim, but not chotim. So that was one stream. And the other stream was that he was acher, he was somebody else. Whatever he is, he's not part of us. We don't want to have anything to do with it. We don't want to deal with it. So that's the story of Amalek redux, playing it all over again. How should we deal with it? And these are issues that have never been answered in Jewish history. They go back and forth. And they continually arise. When the issue arises, so then as it does, for instance, now with Poland, so then it reminds us of all of these problems, of what went before. And the truth of the matter is that neither side of the issue can bring a proof to the fact that what they did was correct. And therefore, that's a conundrum. I think that's part of what the Torah means when it says, Lo sishkach, don't forget. These issues will constantly arise, the Torah is telling us. Amalek as a genetic tribe may disappear, but Amalek as an idea and a force in the world never disappears. And I will not allow you to forget it, therefore. You have to remember. But the Torah is not clear to us as to how we should react, what we should do. And that remains, therefore, a basic issue until our day regarding many events and policies that exist in the Jewish world. The basic problem the Torah itself pointed out, Lo Yarei Elohim, whether that refers to the Jewish people or to the non-Jewish Amalek. Yitzchak Avinu said to Avimelech said, how did you tell me such a story? She's your sister, she's your wife. And he said to him, I see Rakein Yiras Elohim b'makom hazeh. There's no fear of God here in the land of the Plishtim over which you're the king. As such, all of us are vulnerable. I have to say she's my sister, because if I say she's my wife, you'll take her. And therefore, the idea of Yiras Elokim is really the basic issue. Anyone who had a semblance of fear of God could not have participated in the atrocities that befell the Jewish people. But only when we take God and we, so to speak, rebuild God in our own image, so God is what we want him to be, so then certainly there's no Yira there. And then the worst of crimes can be perpetrated in the name of that God, as has happened throughout history. So therefore, this Parsha of Amalek, Lo Sishkoch, it's one of the things that we should constantly have in mind. Remember, because of the fact that it is a recurring issue and it remains a very, very difficult one to deal with in a practical manner. So I want to thank you all for coming and to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. The next Shabbos, next Friday, we will once again have a class. Be well and Shabbat Shalom.